ta phải dừng một vài chặng để chúng ta nghỉ. Cũng vậy, khi chúng ta đến chùa để lễ Phật, để tụng kinh, thì chúng ta nếu còn thiếu một hai việc, đó là chúng ta sẽ chưa hoàn mãn cái tâm thành của chúng ta. Đó là chúng ta phải phát nguyện và sám hối. Hôm nay con xin cung thỉnh Hòa Thượng chủ trì sẽ hướng dẫn buổi để phát nguyện và sám hối cho đạo tràng của chúng con, để chúng con có được một hành trình đi tới viên mãn Di Đà Phật.
Kính thưa tất cả quý Phật tử và đại chúng có mặt hôm nay. Chúng ta rất là bận rộn trong đời sống ở Mỹ. Đáng lý ra chúng ta phải thường xuyên quán chiếu lại những việc làm, những suy nghĩ và những hành động, những lời nói của chúng ta trong mỗi ngày và trong mỗi giờ. Tuy nhiên, thật sự trong một đời sống và môi trường của chúng ta ở nhà, công việc, nó không phải là một cái hoàn cảnh để chúng ta thường xuyên nhớ nghĩ, để suy gẫm lại những gì mình làm sai, không đúng, mình phải thay đổi, sửa đổi nó. Do đó mỗi ngày Chủ nhật chúng ta về chùa, đây là một cái cơ hội tốt để chúng ta nhìn lại chính mình trong vài phút, để chúng ta xin sám hối, để chúng ta thề nguyện rằng bắt đầu ngày mai tuần tới chúng ta sẽ có một tuần lễ không lặp lại và không làm những điều sai đó. We are very busy for working, take care of the family in our daily life. Every Sunday we come to the temple, we gather together, we try to reflect what did we do wrong during this week, for thinking, wrong in actions, wrong in talking, and we confess and we vow tomorrow is Monday, the next week we won't repeat it again, we will stop it. That's the way we confess and reflection ourselves. I would like to invite everybody to keep in silence for 2 minutes to recall what did we do wrong in this week. Please hit the bell, we start. Cảm ơn quý vị. Và bây giờ đây mời quý vị đứng lên. Chúng ta cùng sám hối. Sám hối với ai? Sám hối với chính lòng của mình, với sự chứng giám của 10 phương Tam Bảo. Do đó xin đại chúng lặp theo chúng tôi 3 lần như thế này. Kính lạy 10 phương Tam Bảo.
Kính lạy 10 phương Tam Bảo.
Chứng giám cho lòng sám hối của chúng con.
Chứng giám cho lòng sám hối của chúng con.
Kính lạy 10 phương Tam Bảo.
Kính lạy 10 phương Tam Bảo.
Chứng giám cho lòng sám hối của chúng con.
Chứng giám cho lòng sám hối của chúng con.
Kính lạy 10 phương Tam Bảo.
Kính lạy 10 phương Tam Bảo.
Chứng giám cho lòng sám hối của chúng con.
Chứng giám cho lòng sám hối của chúng con.
Và sau đây xin mời đại chúng lặp theo 5 lời phát nguyện của người Phật tử chúng ta. Chúng con nguyện.
Chúng con nguyện.
Không sát hại sinh mạng và tàn phá thiên nhiên.
Không sát hại sinh mạng và tàn phá thiên nhiên.
Không dối trá khi làm việc.
Không dối trá khi làm việc.
Không lừa gạt trong tình cảm vợ chồng.
không lừa gạt trong tình cảm vợ chồng,
không nói dối và chửi mắng,
không nói dối và chửi mắng,
không dùng các hợp chất ma túy.
không dùng các hợp chất ma túy.
Nam mô Đại Bi Quang Thế Âm Bồ Tát.
Nam mô Đại Bi Quang Thế Âm Bồ Tát.
Xin gia lực cho lời nguyện của chúng con.
Xin gia lực cho lời nguyện của chúng con.
Xin mời đại chúng cùng niệm Quang Thế Âm 3 lần. Nam mô Đại Bi Quang Thế Âm Bồ Tát. Nam
mô Đại
Bi Quang Thế Âm Bồ Tát. Nam mô Đại Bi Quang Thế Âm Bồ Tát. Xin mời đại chúng ngồi xuống. Please be seated. Và sau đây chúng tôi xin được có một vài cái thông báo sinh hoạt của chùa chúng ta. Cái thông báo thứ nhất là thưa tất cả quý Phật tử, từ trước tới giờ những hình ảnh thờ trong nhà linh của chúng ta đó, sau 49 ngày thì chúng ta có cái hình nhỏ thờ ở bên trên đó. Trong cái mùa đại dịch từ năm ngoái năm nay, chúng tôi có yêu cầu quý vị ở chùa chúng ta để các hình ảnh lâu hơn cho được ấm cúng. Tuy nhiên nhất là mùa này là mùa đông, nhiều người mất quá, và cái số hình ảnh ở dưới đó, nó quá nhiều, cho nên những vị mà vừa mất trong tháng trước và tháng này đó, không có chỗ để hình chính giữa để chúng ta làm cái lễ thọ tang cúng cơm nó được trang nghiêm. Cho nên xin sư cô sẽ giúp dùm cho việc này. Tất cả những cái hình mà để ở dưới đã có hình ở trên rồi, và nếu thời gian qua đã lâu thì chúng ta tạm thời cất hoặc là quý vị có thể mang về nhà, hoặc là ở chùa giữ cất ở đó, vì chúng ta sẽ nhường những cái chỗ này còn lại để các cái vị vừa nằm xuống trong thời gian gần đây được để vào chính giữa để chúng ta làm lễ trang nghiêm. Đại chúng có hoan hỷ vậy không? Có người thưa rằng nếu họ trúng số, họ thì xây cái tháp 7 tầng để thờ linh không nha. Đó là cái thông báo thứ nhất. Hôm nay chúng ta có một người Phật tử, một cái người guest, và cái người guest này hôm nay sẽ nói về đạo Phật. Khi mà người này, người Phật tử thân yêu của chùa chúng ta đó, anh ta còn là một giáo sư, mỗi ngày mà mỗi tuần về chùa dạy dỗ cho những người Mỹ ở đây. Quý Phật tử nào muốn học võ thì về chùa, cái chuyện đó thì chút nữa anh ta sẽ thông báo. Sau cái bài nói chuyện của anh Chistopher thì người chuyển ngữ là Phật tử Quang Tuệ sẽ là người summarize lại cái bài nói chuyện này. Và sau đó không biết là hôm nay ca sĩ Nha Thanh có mặt không? Hello, ok. Sau bài nói chuyện của Chistopher và chuyển ngữ của anh Quang Tuệ sẽ ca sĩ Nha Thanh sẽ lên cống hiến cho đại chúng cái gì đó. Đây là cái thông báo cho buổi lễ hôm nay. Và nhà linh đặc biệt tuần tới chúng tôi được xin thông báo bài giảng của thầy Thiện Đức vào ngày Chủ Nhật tuần tới, và trong đó có một cái bài thơ thiền của Hòa Thượng Kim Đài. Nam mô A Di Đà Phật. Và một thông báo cuối cùng, chúng con xin cung thỉnh tất cả chư tăng trong ngày Chủ Nhật thì chúng ta không có cơ hội gặp nhau, Phật tử cũng không có cơ hội về chùa thường xuyên mỗi ngày, chúng ta chỉ gặp nhau vào ngày Chủ Nhật vài tiếng đồng hồ. Xin yêu cầu chư tăng chúng ta ghét like như Phật tử lấy thức ăn và ăn ở tại cái garden hall này, chúng ta có thăm tình với nhau. Nam mô A Di Đà Phật. my friend. Wonderful. Please come over here. Please give a big hand from Mr. Chistopher. You look like a father. He's a Buddhist in our temple. He provides martial art. He provides the speech, and he have many plans for our temple in the future. And now today, please give a speech to our people. Okay, thank you.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My brothers and sisters in the faith. I've been asked to speak today, and I consider it a great honor to be able to be here today and speak before all of you and those around the world who will be seeing this through the internet. Today is March 7th, 2021. But it is also significant for me in a different way, because in March 7th of 1952, the man who cleared the way for me to understand Buddhism and a lot of the other faiths of this world, a man by the name of Paramahansa Yogananda, went into what is called Mahasamadhi, or in some respects you can call it death, or that transitioning into the next level. And so I just want to thank and kiss the soil of the land that created him, which is that of India, a land that has given us so much, including our beloved Buddha and many other great men. So, but the introduction and purpose of this speech this morning is to discuss the Eightfold Path of Buddhism. And in the process of preparing this speech, there was a lot of complications. Not so much for me, but for a lot of people in my circle of life. You know, the master monks would come to me and say, hey, you know, there's a lot of suffering that's going around in this world on a global scale, on a macro and micro, you know, globally and individually. And as soon as they'd asked me to do that, I started contemplating what would be the appropriate way to address the Eightfold Path of Buddhism. And I think that if I am successful in conveying this morning, you're going to look at this very place that you're sitting right now in a different light. And so, first and foremost, we have to ask a question about Buddhism in Vietnam, right? I mean, this is a Vietnamese Buddhist temple. But it has partly to do with the beauty of the geography of Vietnam. It is both equally distant between that of both China and India. And with the Silk Road and the Spice Route, Vietnam actually was, you know, during the first century, was able to have that exposure to Buddhism 3 centuries before that of China, in fact. So Vietnam has a really strong history of warfare. It has a really, not just against foreign enemies, but it's also domestic ones. It's different types of government, different types of regimes. Vietnam it's another land that creates a very strong people. Very strong. And so we understand that a country that has a history of struggling and suffering in so many ways, who else, right, to understand the nature of dukkha. Dukkha is the Sanskrit term for suffering. And so I just wanted to kind of explain something here. The Buddha left us a series of gifts. And each time that we've spoken, we've kind of spoken about, in a previous conversation, we've spoken about the 3 gems. We're going to touch base just lightly on the 4 Noble Truths and then get into the Eightfold Path. But, you know, dukkha, just on this stage this morning, we've heard English and Vietnamese and Indian languages and Pali terminology, so it's a pretty international place, this stage, right? But an important word is dukkha. It is suffering in Sanskrit. And it's not a word that is foreign to us here in the West. It's penetrated into one of our most beloved tales, which is the Star Wars series. In Star Wars, we have the story of Count Dooku. And if anybody ever got to understand the history of that character, is because he had suffered so much, became embedded into his name. And so the Buddha's journey, his discovery, his quest was to understand the nature of suffering. And, this is a dunya, this is a maya, this is a dimension of delusion. This is an impermanent realm in which we live. All of us are born, and we're all going to be checking out at some point. We're going to be moving on into the next dimension. And so, but in that process, there is dukkha, there is suffering. And so this became the focal point of what the Buddha set out to do, was to understand the nature of suffering. And so in his quest and understanding of what we refer to now as the Four Noble Truths, we can kind of surmise it in 4 words, with the first word being that of dukkha, which we say is suffering. The second word is called trishna. Okay? Technically it means to thirst in Sanskrit. Your thirst for desire in this application. Nirvana, or nirvana, depending on how you like to pronounce that last vowel. We see that too. We see Kurt Cobain, and we see the Nirvana rock group. And the last term is magga, okay, which kind of describes our path. So the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism was really to address what they consider an unholy trinity. In discovering, because the first part of that noble path, the first step, is acknowledging that suffering exists. Physical, mental, spiritual suffering exists. That's number 1. We admit that suffering exists. Dukkha, we define it. And during the process of defining dukkha, we come across what they call the unholy trinity. And this unholy trinity, it also, by investigating dukkha, we discover ignorance, anger, and greed. Ignorance, anger, and greed. That's the pandemic that affects us all. That is our unholy trinity. And so, but this leads to what? This leads to dukkha. This leads to the suffering. And so, our objective when we understand that is that we understand what causes that suffering is this word trishna. Trishna is to thirst. It is to desire. And we always have these cute expressions. I desire not to desire, therefore I desire. I mean, it's a cool little play on it, but the truth is that we thirst, or we feed our thirst. It can open up imbalanced, and lacking of moderation opens up to addiction, whether it's money, power, sex, vengeance. The list is long. But it is this trishna, it is this thirst. And so when we take a look at what is the origin of suffering, it is that thirst. It is that trishna. And so once we understand that it exists, that we understand what causes it, then we can work on to the third step of the Four Noble Truths, and that is the cessation of suffering. The cessation, the elimination. And so when you have thirst, these unhealthy thirst, you simply don't feed it. That is the truest meaning in that simplistic Sanskrit terminology, is do not feed it. That is nirvana, right? Do not feed your thirst. And you learn to kind of be like a duck. You learn to let things kind of flow off your back. Accept that there are things that are beyond your control. If you're a controlling person, don't be addicted to control. If you're a person that likes to suffer, let it go. Don't be addicted to suffering. Whatever it is for your own individual constitution. But in doing so, a lot of times we look inside of ourselves and say, I don't know how, Chris. I don't know how. I'm so angry. I'm so emotional. I'm so upset. This guy yesterday when I was driving my car, Stop. Okay? This fourth noble truth is called magga. And magga means the road, the life path. It is, but this fourth noble truth is actually what we do when we create the Eightfold Path. It breaks it down to 8 separate components, of which we're going to discuss here in a minute. But again, I want to make sure we understand that this dukkha, trishna, nirvana, and magga, they are so important for us to understand. They affect each and every one of us here and each and every one of us on this planet. All of us. Nobody is free from that. And it was because of that acknowledgement, because of that observation that suffering is a part of life, that the Buddha sent out for his quest to understand the nature of suffering. And that became not only his purpose, but it led to the Buddha's greatest gifts. And so when we say the greatest gifts, we have the right terminology. We say the 3 gems, which are Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. And if you've heard my previous speeches, then I'm not going to go into in depth in those, just to remind you guys. Buddha simply means the example. Buddha set the example that what he set out to do, he accomplished, and he can continue to do so. The Dhamma is the path, the map, the education that he said, I'm not going to leave you guys blind and without it. So then they put the Dhamma into effect. Thirdly is the Sangha. All of you sitting here today and all of you watching, you are a member of that Sangha. We are a group. We come together to understand ourselves, but sometimes there's things going on inside of ourselves that the guy sitting next to us can tell us, listen, man, you kind of got this going on. You're not even aware of it. So we come together as a Sangha to acknowledge things about ourselves, to ask questions about ourselves, and the Sangha is extremely important. So those are our 3 primary gems, the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. And you heard the Venerable Dong Vien come up here this morning when we were doing the chanting and say, I take refuge in the Buddha. That's a very important statement. When you say, I take refuge in the Buddha, I don't wish anybody suffering, may they all be free of harm, and may nobody plot the demise of another. How important is that in a world like we live in today? So we're taking refuge not in a man, we're not taking refuge in a deity of sorts. We are taking, for the initiate, for the novitiate, for the starter on this path of understanding himself, we're taking refuge in the Buddha, is that we're taking refuge in the education, in the gifts that the Buddha had given us. Because they have to be applicable to ourselves. It's great that Siddhartha was able to accomplish Buddhahood. Man, I couldn't be happier for him. But he left so many gifts for you to understand yourself and the world that we live, so we don't destroy one another. And so when we embrace that gift of the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, we understand, we take refuge in those 3 gems, then we really start to realize the nature of this dunya, this dimension, this maya, this matrix. And really, you can use Sanskrit, you can use Arabic, which because of the studies of Sufism and some other things, I use a lot of Arabic and Sanskrit. But the key word in English here, when we look at this matrix, maya, dunya, is impermanence. That is the mantra, right? Impermanence. Where this is not an eternal place. If you study physics, you realize that the universe has a life cycle. It expands, it contracts, and it'll eventually burn out. And maybe not the rest of the universe for our purpose, but our Earth is, and it will. So we understand impermanence no matter if it's the planet, if it's you, if it's me, your children, it doesn't matter. Every single thing. Rust on your car is an example of impermanence. Nothing is eternal. In this dimension, in this dunya, in this matrix, we move on to the next, and then to the next, and then to the next, And so we have a saying that we really kind of borrow from Sufism, and that is that, God created the world to train the faithful. Now, that expression is more indicative of this is one giant university. This is our university. We become souls manifested here, and our life begins to have a purpose. But we are here being tested at every single moment of every day. Will you pass your test? The Master, before we come up, he said, let's take 2 minutes to think about all the things that we did that were, the mistakes that we made, and try to realize that those were mistakes that were made, let them go, and then move forward. Move forward and let it behind and try not to repeat the same behaviors. It seems simple in an expression, but you're going to, as I continue on, you're going to understand it's a very important understanding to have. It has a strong history, because now we say God created the earth to train the faithful, and we understand that this is an impermanent realm. Well, then where is eternity? And I can bring up simply the words of the Christ. The kingdom of heaven lies within. The kingdom of heaven lies within. And so we find this journey that goes, we start looking inside of ourselves, we start to realize we may not be properly equipped. We're born, we have a mother and a father, but we're so busy looking outside of ourselves and looking at what's going on inside the dunya, inside and Maya and the matrix, that we don't have the proper education to look inside of ourselves. And then when we do, we realize we find two major components. And that first major component is the mind, and the second component is the heart. Now in English is a very liberal language, right? There's kind of hard to say things incorrectly in a lot of things when it comes to English. But if you contemplate where some of these things come from, for example, we say, I had a change of heart. Well, yesterday I thought I changed my mind about it. Okay, well, which was it? Did you change your heart or did you change your mind? For someone like myself and the monks here, they study the mind and the heart, and they understand the differences behind them. And in English, we so casually say, I had a change of mind. I had a change of heart. We don't even contemplate the difference between the two in most cases. So, I had the privilege of, and I'm going to explain why they're having the privilege as well. But it is a privilege to be here, and it is a privilege to have exposure to these monks. And one of them is the venerable monk, Maitri. Last week, he and I were sitting right over there at that table. I come here to study. It's one of the best places if you want to get away from the world and study. And he says, Chris, I want to have a conversation with you. And I said, sure. Now we sat down, we had a wonderful conversation. Unfortunately, it was cut a little bit short. I would have liked to have gone it longer, but cut a little bit short. But the meat of it was the conversation of which impacts which. Is the mind impact the heart, or does the heart impact the mind? It's a tough one. It's a tough one in which two people who have dedicated themselves to these type of studies are still, in some respects, having this conversation. We may even know what some of the Dhamma says this, or the Quran says this, or the Bible says this, but it's an individual contemplation, and we say, what remains in control? In the words of Maitri was, the mind affects the heart, because we're always getting bombarded, and whatever goes into the mind will go directly to the heart, and the heart can become a beacon of light, or it can become a beacon of suffering and pain and darkness. And of course, if you're a blessing if your heart is light, and you can be a curse if your heart is broken, because you affect those around us because of our interconnection. Unfortunately, as I said, the conversation got cut a little bit short, but we ended that conversation, and I wasn't content where we left off, and it bothered me for about a good 3-4 days. Finally, when I was able to get back to here at the temple, I had to discuss it further, but unfortunately my Maitri wasn't around, and so I had the opportunity to speak with Viên, Venerable Viên, who is such a great, if you ever get the chance to speak about Dhamma, all the monks are great. And I said, Viên, I'm upset. I'm upset because I can't, Buddhism may say this, and Sufism says this, and he says, you can have these, monks are people. They're like you and me. They like to laugh and cry and do the regular things, but when they go into monk mode, you better just stand by, buddy. Because his hand comes together like this, and he says, oh, Christopher. And I said, oh man, I'm like, it's about to go down, And it's true, it was beautiful what he said. He tells me, Christopher, you can analyze the mind. You can understand its workings. You can think of every thought, every deed. You can take the brain, you can cut it up as individual components. And you can do the same with the heart. You can rip the heart out. You can show its ventricles. You can show all the different chambers and the arteries. And you can think about, but the truth is, as much as you try to analyze them individually, physically and in this respect, metaphorically and spiritually, they cannot function independently. They are one system that is connected to one another. And when you understand, and it put my soul at ease, it was the right answer, because I was so busy trying to separate one from the other, I got caught in analysis. Not looking that I can't have one without the other. Neither can you. Neither can you. And so, in Sufism, historically the focus is on the heart. And they refer to divinity as the beloved. And you read these wonderful Sufi poetry that comes from great ones like Yunus Emir, who I can't, that's just, and we use a lot of that too, and through in India as well. We say, the drop, your soul is but one drop of the divine ocean. Well, that's Yunus Emir. Rumi, the great Sufi poet Rumi, who is the #1 poet read all over the world. He refers to his beloved. He wrote this called the Mathnawi, or the Maznavi in Farsi. It's the Sufic way of choosing the heart first and focusing on the throne of God is the heart for the Sufis. And yet when we go to the other side of the house, so to speak, we look at the Buddhist way, or the Sanatana Dharma way of looking at it, we address the issues of the mind first. And so we have the same way that the Sufis have the Mathnawi and a lot of the poetry. The eastern side of the house has it too. It's Zen, it's Chan. If you follow the Japanese aspect of it, you'll call it Zen. If you want to follow that Chinese aspect, you'll call it Chan. But really, it's a way of explaining mindfulness, the observance of existence through the mind. So now, as you see, we have an active heart with a way of understanding its own unique properties, a mind of understanding its own unique properties. And we look inside of ourselves and we can see that this whole world is going. When you first come to a Buddhist monastery, they sit there very quietly, as they are now, and they say, Christopher, the world of the Buddhist is an internal one. And guess what? They're absolutely right. But, if you're not exposed to Buddhism, you're not in it, you say, well, what is it? I don't even know what that means, man. Well, we're going to understand it today. So in the inside of ourselves, when we realize that distance between the heart and the mind, that space between the two is called the Kurukshetra. In Sanskrit, we call it the Kurukshetra. The Kurukshetra is this battlefield that goes on inside of yourself. It is a reflection of it can be the harmony and even the disharmony of the distance between the mind and the heart. And that gets affected by, in the meditation practices, the yogis would call the 99 kurus, right? These 99 evil personality traits that you can have inside of yourself. And they have, even of these 99, sometimes they combine like particles, right? They can combine and mutate into something else. But none of them are good. All 99 of those kurus are no good. The Sufis address that, what they call the 99 names of Allah. When they say the 99 names of Allah, it's a way for them to kind of have a counter for that. They take that ugliness and they submit it before the throne of God, and they lower their head in sujud. As when you see Muslims pray, they bring their head down. And it means submission. But, either way, it becomes this method of self-analysis. And to use two very important terms, the distance, or like a football field, we'll say. What is the length of the Kurukshetra inside of ourselves? That Kurukshetra, that battlefield inside of us, is the distance between manas, our ego mind, or buddhi, our highest enlightenment. Each person has a different size battlefield. We all have them. Some less than others, some greater than others, maybe many of us about the same. But that difference between buddhi and manas, we have to find a way to invoke some type of a self-analysis. And we have some type of a moral compass. In Arabic we say fidr. And we looked at the Kurukshetra, it's the story, in the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, they talk about this blind king whose name was Dhritarashtra. He was a reflection of the ego. And he had this vizier named Sanjay. And he would look and he would say, Sanjay, on the battlefield of good and evil that is occurring when inside of myself, what did they? What did they? And Sanjay would tell him, well, Your Majesty, this is what happened today. So it's a metaphor. The stories of the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata, they're metaphors because they tell you, they show you that there's a method of pulling yourself out of yourself and observing what's going on inside of you. And this becomes the battlefield for the throne. Who's going to sit on the throne inside of you? Is it going to be ego consciousness, or is it going to be soul consciousness? And if you fight that battle and you learn the understanding of the 3 gems, the 4 noble truths, and now we'll get into the aspects of the Eightfold Path, we realize that moment of realization, that unity or the oneness of ourselves, the Arabs will simply say, or the Muslims and Sufis will say, La ilaha illallah, there is no God but God. And that is awakening into Buddha nature when you understand that oneness. What in the terminology for that we use in the Sanskrit is called samadhi. Samadhi. But we can actually meditate, we can learn to concentrate. Eventually concentration will turn into meditation. And when you reach that stage of meditation, you reach that point of what is known as samadhi. Now you can taste it. No simpler than you can have a cup of water. But can you maintain it? And that's why, and these men here, they are working to maintain that level of samadhi consciousness at all times. And that highest level of consciousness, samadhi, that highest level of when concentration breaks into meditation, is broken up of mapping the mind and the soul into 10 different levels. The 10th level of samadhi is called nirvikalpa samadhi consciousness. That's what the Buddha experienced. He took samadhi consciousness to a level that nobody else has accomplished. Try and find them. Try to find those who reach that level of nirvikalpa samadhi consciousness. You'll find you'll be busy. So, but the true essence of samadhi consciousness is the fusion of cosmic consciousness, that divine force all around us, with our own individual consciousness called Christ consciousness. And it lifts the veil of separation. And all of us, look, I want to explain something. And when I mentioned that all these problems I had going up to preparing this speech was personal problems between interfaith dialogue. I had Christians and Muslims and people of all different faiths that were coming to me and say, Chris, I really like Buddhism, but I don't want to leave this and I don't want to do that. And I'm worried about this. And the other side of that was there was a lot of personal problems going on, domestic abuse and loss of life and occupation and money. What a perfect time to bring these things up. And so we're going to address all of these together. But because when we lift that veil of separation and realize the harmonization of cosmic consciousness with the Christ consciousness, or that divinity in us, we lift the veil of separation. So, and we maintain that. Some do it through dhikr or mantras or chanting, pranayam, so that it's repetition type of things. Repetitions, you see every one of these monks here will have their beads with them. They're just going through and doing, it helps you maintain that level of meditation, that level of concentration. Can we all just walk around the earth all day with just beads in our hand? No, we can keep it in our hand, a lot of people do. But we have to have a system that helps us map that inside of ourselves. And the beads help. They can help us maintain samadhi. It helps us maintain that by, like I said, doing dhikr is the Arabic word for chanting or mantras. Mantras, obviously. Chanting, as you hear, we did for a while this morning in various fashions. Group chanting, individual chanting. But as we develop concentration, we quiet the mind and we learn to be one with the one. That's the essence of our Buddha essence, is questing to find our true Buddhahood. Look, Can somebody go put Buddha in a box? No. Why? Because the Buddha essence is everywhere. It is in every single thing. That's the Buddha nature. You have to confuse, don't confuse an image, don't confuse a story. Understand that there's Buddha in the enlightenment, but then there's Buddhahood and Buddha, essence of Buddhahood, or Buddha. So we use this quieting of the mind and being one-on-one and try to track our own self-awareness. And then we embrace the Eightfold Path. Now if you look around in this temple, you're going to see this pretty much everywhere, right? You're going to see it right here. You're going to see it behind me. Do we even know what this is? How many of us just think it's a nice wheel? Maybe the Vietnamese were nautical. Right? It's a captain's wheel, you know? No, this is a very, very, very important symbol. This may be your saving grace of sorts. Because why? The Eightfold Path, and this is called the Dharma wheel, by the way. Dharma is the Sanskrit for the right way or righteousness. But this Eightfold Path, this wheel, offers us a way of contemplation at all moments. Whether you're working, cleaning, showering, listening, walking, talking. It's an awareness of this Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path, and I'm not going to go down item by item. I'm just going to tell you what they are. It'll be up to you to do some research and do some contemplation. But the first of that wheel, the first spoke, if you look, each spoke represents a different characteristic, a different component on the path. Okay? And so the first of that being right intentions. Your right intention, what is a right intention? I don't know, free your mind of evil. That's a good place to start. You know? The second is right speech. Say nothing that hurts others. Right actions. That's the third. Working for the good of others. Right livelihood. Respecting life. Living a life with purpose. The next is right effort. Resisting evil. And continuing in your service to your fellow man. Right concentration. Practice meditation. Meditate, meditate, meditate. Right mindfulness. Because of meditation, you will sure to learn to control your thoughts. And when you go from right intentions, speech, actions, livelihoods, efforts, concentration, mindfulness, there's a real beauty at the end of that tunnel, guys. It's called the right view. And the right view is knowing the truth. Know the truth, the right view. So you see in Christianity, they say pick up your cross. Well, okay, pick up your cross. So you're sacrificing your ego and you're sacrificing your flesh on the cross. That's the purpose of the crucifix of Christianity. There's many, but that's for the individual Christian engaging in that practice, that's what it is. It is another symbol identical to this. You want to crucify your ego, crucify your flesh, well, you're going to need the Eightfold Path to do so. I challenge you to do that without using the Eightfold Path. You know, go ahead, buddy. If you figure that out, let me know. You know? So we use these metaphors, we use these symbols, whether it's the Dharma wheel or the cross. But we see the kingdom of heaven lies within. And within Christianity, there's a scripture of Matthew 6:22 that says, "See thy God with thy one eye. Let thy eye be of light and thy body be of light." That's what happens when we observe on the inside. And so when we look at the cross, we also look at the image of the Buddha. When we look at the image of the Buddha, we're not having to crucify the ego or crucify the mind. We are looking at all times the divinity that is in us, that Buddha nature that is inside of us. So if we understand the three gems, and we understand the Four Noble Truths, and we take that fourth component of Magga and we break it down into the Eightfold Path, we really start to understand ourselves much better. And so, what becomes the fruit of that tree? You and you and you, all of you out there that embrace that, create a tree. Judge a tree by its fruit, do you not? Love, compassion, understanding. They're universal. They don't have a name. Nobody has a monopoly on divinity. But we can definitely try to understand where we fit into that equation. And that is a very important of the one vision of self. You know, in Sanskrit, we say namaskar. It's a way of saying, or namaste, you can hear it in Hindi, but they say the divine in me acknowledges and bows to the divine in you. Right? We see it in English too. We see the word universe. Uni, one, ver, to see, se, of the self. Seeing the one's vision within ourself. Every time you turn on the movie and you see the planet Earth turning, it says, "Welcome to Universal Studios." There it is, staring you right in that face. Even television can remind you of the universal self. In me, in you, and in all of us. And so whether you call them kurus, or whether you call them nafs, or whether you call them sins, you know, it's to always remember that Buddhism, embracing this path of the eightfold path of Buddhism, you know, grammar is important to remember. You can look at it as a noun and say, well, you know, this is the eightfold path, or you can look at it as a verb. So, be a verb. Be the Word incarnate. Be in the constant state of in the moment. Practice and exercise mindfulness. You want to be Christian? Do some Christing. You want to be a Buddhist? Do some Buddha-ing. You want to be the Muslim? Do some Islam-ing. You're being a verb. You're in the present tense of mindfulness and awareness. And that's what the gift that the Buddha has given us. And so, even as far as Christianity goes, they use Greek as their liturgical, right? For Catholics and Orthodox. So, we'll say Latin and Greek. But in this case, Catholicos also is the remembrance of the universal in us all. So, you see, when we look at these interfaith dialogues, we realize that we are one family. We are diverse in all of our different ways, but we are one family. And it reminds us of our human nature. Now, we are human beings. Hu is light. It's a Sanskrit term. Hu, light, man, manifestation. We are manifestations of light. So if you're a human being, you're a light being. Physics supports that. You can isolate the particles of our hand and trace it down to its smallest nature into light. So, you know, you learn to enjoy the diversity of your brothers and sisters on this big blue ball floating in space. Doesn't matter what the terminology that they use, whether it's Arabic or Sanskrit, Vietnamese, Indian languages, English. We're all in this one family, all dealing with the same exact problems. But that path, the three gems, the Four Noble Truths, and the Eightfold Path, but where do we find it? Well, we learn to embrace the Buddha nature in each and every one of us. We see our own individual diversity, our own uniqueness. We all connected as one, but we're also different. But how do we develop that? How do we come to a better understanding? Where can we go to understand ourselves? Well, guess what, guys? For you sitting in the audience, you're already here. And these are the men that are here to train you, to guide you. This is the all-in-one, baby. This is the schwa, as they say, you know. That's my horrible English pronunciation of the Vietnamese word for temple, but you know, but the Buddhist temple. In this temple here you find mental, physical, spiritual. It's all those. It's a refinement center. And so we look at this structure here at the Kong Tien Temple. You know, when you go through this temple, when all of you come through here, what do you come through? You are literally coming through the golden gates. And when you see on those yellow bars, you see the symbols of the Dharma wheel are right there. It's again, before you step foot in here, as you're coming from the world, whatever it is that you're coming from with your own individual backgrounds, you come in through those gates and kapow, you've got the Dharma wheels right there on the door. And when you look beyond the Dharma wheel, right in front of you, if you close the gates and look right behind that Dharma wheel, there are two lions sitting right there. These beautiful symbols of nobility. And behind, exactly behind those, and what's between the two lions? The Dharma wheel. But behind those two lions are these giant statues of these horrible-looking warrior-like creatures, right? They represent those gurus. They represent your desires, your trishnas, the things, the impurities in yourself. And you realize that that's what you're overcoming. And where do you overcome that? Where do you get the knowledge? Well, guess what? The doors open up and you're now in the Buddha chamber. You're in the Buddha hall. And that's where you put in your work. That's your gym, ladies and gentlemen. That is where you put in your work. Right? You're coming from the Dharma wheel, using that as a tool to keep yourself in moderate control and understanding, coming through those gates, going through that journey. You end up in the Buddha hall to where you try to commune with that Buddha nature. And if you don't know how to do it, they're here. And at the end of the tale, at the end of the journey, at some point or another, we all end up in that Na Lin, that death house. My sister's in there. My sister's in there. She died horribly. But she's prayed for every day. But you'll be there, and you'll be there, you'll be there, I'll be there. We're not promised tomorrow. So now's a pretty good idea to take this to heart, you know? Meet with your monks and learn to utilize the temple for what it is. This temple is a very important one because of the history of the monks that are responsible for founding it. Now, but again, the Dharma wheel and it's important. I want to make sure we understand this because I'm trying not to be long-winded, and the monk's been kind enough to let me continue. But guys, I just want to make sure we understand something. You know, Eastern and Western education, as far as both physical fitness and obtaining a college degree, let's say, you know, intellectually speaking, the Western world deals with the tangible. We create an elite. We create consumer masters that provide goods. And that's the overall nature of our education in the West. And our physical education is trying to make ourselves aesthetically pleasing to somebody else, if not ourselves. It's kind of a type of vanity. But when we look in the East, it's a little bit different. You know, the Eastern concept is the dedication to self-refinement. And I always like to use this example from the Middle East the Middle East is a very wealthy place. If you haven't been there, I've been there a lot. And historically, it was a center of culture, education. It's got a lot that's going on there. But because they had such excessive wealth, they said that the rich man and the poor man must attain a level of equality. And what makes somebody superior in one respect to another man is his level of piety. How pious is he? How many times, rich or poor, will he lower his head to God and say, "Take me as I am and make me better"? So, if you're wealthy, be humble. If you're poor, be humble. They're just simply different blessings and different existence, but it's all one Buddha nature. And so on your journey, there will be successes and failures. But, you know, here, as the monks mentioned, we're now training martial arts. There's martial arts at this temple for a long time, and a lot of the monks, I come here in the mornings, and some of them are out there just really going at it, you know, in different ways. But martial arts is similar in that respect, especially the martial arts we train in the West. It is imposition of will over somebody else. Well, there's also type of movements that we can embrace that are not about the imposition of wills over others. That's the external aspect of it. The internal aspect is that there's, you know, Qigong, Tai Chi, yoga. In Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, we use ginástica natural. There's the movement training of someone like an Ido Portal. You know, these guys, they're fusing the mind and the body together. So when you think of coming to this temple and meeting with these monks, you're not just coming here to listen to someone like myself or me with a monk just talk for whatever reason. There's plenty for you to do at a Buddhist temple. You can train physically. You can train mentally. You can sit down and find guidance. And so, you know, and it's important to harmonize through meditation with that Buddha nature. It's like Bruce Lee said, it is not I that hits, but it that hits through me, right? So, you know, I just want to say that martial arts are important, but movement is important. But do not use that to impose your will on others. There may be a time and a place for that, but it's not in your regular everyday life. There's no ninjas jumping out of the bushes. Are you a ninja? Because I think you got them, you know. So but we don't have that, right? We don't have ninjas jumping out of the bushes. So we use these movements training to develop our character, our personality, and it's another one of the aspects that the monks offer you here at the temple. And so when we really, what I'm trying to get to is that we have a word in Sanskrit called guru, right? The term guru means the dispeller of darkness. It is somebody that you're in a world of darkness, you don't have a map, you don't know where you're going, how to get there, and you look at this Buddha path, and then you say, okay, well, I can look it up on the internet, I think I understand everything about it, and that's not true. It may help you. But it is important to come to your temple, meet with your monks, be very involved in the activities here, because these are your trainers. These are your gurus. These are your trainers, right? So come here, have tea, coffee, grab your Starbucks, grab your coffee, sit down, meet with the monks. There's tables in the front, there's tables in the back, there's tables right there next to us. You're all sitting, there's so many chairs here. You know, sit down at the monastery, meet with your monks, because learn to contemplate. Sit down and read, study, meditate, converse. It doesn't have to necessarily be with a monk. You can come here and meet with each other. You can train martial arts. There's nothing in this Buddhist temple that you can't do. And so, that being said, train, meditate, and grow. Use your temple as much as you can. Learn from the monks as much as you can. You know, Bruce Lee's gone. Bruce Lee's dead. My genealogy is from Bruce Lee and Dan Inosanto to Paul Vunak to myself. Your genealogy is from Gautama Buddha, to the monks, to you. That's your genealogy. The world changes very drastically. Learn what you can from them. And make yourself the best self. And know who you are. Know yourself. And when you know yourself, you're going to change your world. You're going to change the world of those around you. So you change yourself, you change your friends, you change your family, and inevitably, you change your world and you make it a better place. So, there's your trainers. And that being said, Aidafa. Thank you very much. Pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. You have a wonderful speech today for every one of us. I understand, and back to ourselves to practice what we have learned from Buddha. Kính thưa quý thầy, kính thưa quý Phật tử, anh Chistopher là cái người Phật tử thuần thành. Anh học Phật Pháp còn nhiều hơn anh em mình nữa. Thì không thể nào nói hết được tất cả những cái ý của anh muốn. Tức là anh nói từ tứ diệu đế qua 3 viên ngọc quý, tức là Phật Pháp Tăng, rồi nói về bát chánh đạo. Không biết là trong anh em mình có ai hiểu hết cái tứ diệu đế, 3 viên ngọc quý và bát chánh đạo. Thì hy vọng là mọi người chúng ta học được chút xíu từ anh Chris. Nhưng một cái kết thúc của ảnh nó là một cái điều rất là quan trọng cho mỗi người chúng ta cần phải suy nghĩ. Đó là trở về nương tựa ở đây, ở chùa. Anh đã giới thiệu cho chúng ta về bánh xe luân hồi. Khi chúng ta bước vào cửa chùa thì chúng ta đã thấy Pháp của Phật ngay ở đó. Sau khi bước vô cổng chùa, sau lưng ta là Pháp của Phật, trước mặt ta là Pháp của Phật. Chỗ nào chúng ta có thấy Pháp của Phật hết để chúng ta học. Và chủ yếu chúng ta về chùa để chúng ta có những giây phút thật là hạnh phúc, êm đềm. Và quan trọng hơn hết là chúng ta có được những vị thầy ở bên cạnh chúng ta để chỉ cho chúng ta học về Phật Pháp, giúp cho chúng ta
để chúng ta có thể trở về với chính mình, để chúng ta thực tập Phật Pháp, để làm chuyển hóa một con người của mình từ con người khổ đau trở thành con người hạnh phúc. Thì đây, chùa Quang Thiện là một trong những nơi mà rất là quan trọng để chúng ta trở về chùa, để chúng ta có điều kiện và phương tiện để chúng ta thực tập Phật Pháp, để chúng ta có điều kiện để chúng ta chuyển hóa thân tâm của mình. Con có thể đi rất là lẹ trong vòng 1-2 phút để cho xong. Thì quý vị biết là ảnh giới thiệu về tứ diệu đế, tức là khổ tập diệt đạo. Đó là cái bài pháp đầu tiên, gọi là bài chuyển pháp luân kinh mà Phật đã dạy cho 4 anh em Kiều Trầm Như. Thì chúng ta phải đối diện với cái sự khổ đau để chúng ta biết khổ đau đến từ đâu, chúng ta chuyển hóa cái khổ đau để chúng ta đạt được cái hạnh phúc, tức là đạt được đạo, tức là khổ tập diệt đạo. Rồi trở về nương tựa với lại 3 viên ngọc quý là Phật, Pháp và Tăng. Và cái bài kết luận của anh tức là trở về chùa hay là không trở về chùa thì chúng ta cũng phải biết được rằng chúng ta có Phật, chúng ta có Pháp và chúng ta có Tăng để chúng ta nương tựa. Nhưng mà điều quan trọng, chúng ta cũng phải trở về nương tựa Phật, Pháp và Tăng trong chính tự thân của mình. Bởi vì trong chúng ta cũng có Phật, cũng có Pháp và có Tăng. Nếu chúng ta không khơi dậy được cái Phật, Pháp, Tăng của chính mình thì hơi uổng. Thành ra là bên ngoài chúng ta thấy có Phật, có Pháp, có Tăng, nhưng mà chính mình cũng có Phật, có Pháp và có Tăng. Như vậy chúng ta phải làm như thế nào để mà tạo cái cơ hội để Phật, Pháp, Tăng trong chính mình phát triển nhiều hơn, để chúng ta có nhiều hạnh phúc. Và anh nói đến bát chánh đạo thì anh nói là không thể nào mà giải thích được hết. Bát chánh đạo rất dài, nhưng mà đại khái là anh nói quý vị chúng ta biết là bát chánh đạo là 8 cái con đường chuyển hóa. Nếu mà thực tập và phát triển được cái bát chánh đạo, tức là chúng ta có một cái con đường để vượt khỏi khổ đau, để chúng ta có được hạnh phúc ngay bây giờ và ở đây. Thì trong bát chánh đạo thì quý vị biết rồi, thứ nhất là chánh kiến. Thì tiếng Mỹ anh nói hồi nãy là right view, là một cái nhìn chân chính. Cái thứ hai là chánh tư duy, tức là right thinking, tức là cái suy nghĩ của chúng ta đúng. Cái thứ ba là chánh ngữ, tức là right speech, chúng ta phải nói như thế nào để cho người khác khỏi đau khổ, nói ra một lời giúp cho người khác hạnh phúc, thì đó là right speech, nói đúng theo cái pháp. Và cái thứ tư là chánh nghiệp, là right action. Thì quý vị biết được rằng nhờ có chánh tư duy, có chánh ngữ thì chúng ta mới có được tạo ra cái chánh nghiệp, tức là từ cái đầu mình suy nghĩ ra cái đó. Cái thứ năm là chánh mạng, tức là right livelihood, là chúng ta có cái nghề nghiệp chân chính để xa lánh những cái việc làm tổn hại đến người khác, đau khổ người khác. Cái thứ sáu là chánh tinh tấn, tức là right diligence, tức là chúng ta cố gắng, chúng ta nỗ lực không ngừng để chúng ta vượt tất cả những cái chướng ngại để chúng ta có được cái hạnh phúc trên cái con đường giải thoát. Và cái thứ bảy là chánh niệm, là right mindfulness, tức là cái niệm tưởng và cái suy nghĩ của chúng ta đó nó trong sáng và luôn luôn tỉnh thức. Chúng ta phải biết rằng chúng ta đang có mặt ở đây, chúng ta đã biết chúng ta đang làm gì, gọi là tỉnh thức. Cái thứ 8 là chánh định, là right concentration, tức là trở về với mình để thiền quán, để chúng ta có được những cái giây phút hạnh phúc êm đềm. Thành ra anh cứ nhắc đi nhắc lại là về chùa đi, có rất nhiều chỗ để chúng ta thực tập, ngồi xuống ghế, ngồi xuống mấy cái kệ, ngồi trước Phật, có quý thầy, để chúng ta đem cái tâm trở về với cái thân trong cái giây phút hiện tại, để cho chúng ta bớt lăng xăng ở bên ngoài, suy nghĩ hơn thua, giận hờn, ghét bỏ, ngày mai phải làm gì. Tất cả cái đó nó làm cho cái con người của mình nó khổ đau nhiều hơn, sợ hãi nhiều hơn. Thành ra về chùa đây, chúng ta không có cái điều kiện ở bên ngoài lăng xăng, thì chúng ta về chùa có một nơi thanh tịnh để chúng ta ngồi chánh định, tức là chúng ta ngồi thiền, hoặc là đi chung quanh chùa, cũng là một hình thức để chúng ta kéo cái tâm trở về với cái thân, không cho nó đi lộn xộn để chúng ta đau khổ. Đây là một cái mảnh đất để chúng ta thực tập. Anh nói rất là nhiều, nhưng mà chắc là mình không thể nào nói hết, tại vì cái thì giờ rất là ngắn. Nhưng mà anh nhắc là chúng ta phải cố gắng thực tập tứ diệu đế và trở về nương tựa với ba viên ngọc quý, và thực tập bát chánh đạo, là 8 cái con đường để dẫn chúng ta đến một nơi giải thoát. Thì chúng ta sẽ có hạnh phúc ngay trong giờ phút hiện tại và bây giờ, chứ không có cần đi tìm ở đâu xa hết. Thì quý vị đã hiểu anh nói gì rồi, nhưng mà con thể xin tóm lược những cái chính một cái phần anh nói chuyện hôm nay. Còn anh dùng bao nhiêu cái chuyện ví dụ hay là những cái con đường để mà anh đạt đến một cái sự hạnh phúc thì đó là quý vị cũng hiểu hết rồi. Nhưng mà 4 cái điều chính anh muốn nói: tứ diệu đế, 3 viên ngọc quý và 8 con đường thánh để đưa chúng ta đến hạnh phúc và giải thoát. Và cái điều thứ tư anh muốn nhắc mình là thường xuyên trở về chùa, trở về cái ngôi nhà tâm linh của mình, để dựa vào Phật, dựa vào quý thầy, và dựa về với lại chúng ta. Ăn cơm có canh, tu hành có bạn. Nhìn người bạn mình tu, nhìn người bạn mình đi những bước chân thanh thản, không có vội vàng giống như là bị rượt đuổi. Nhìn những người bạn mình ăn nói dễ thương, tất cả cái đó nó giúp cho mình trở thành một cái con người hạnh phúc. Mà mình hạnh phúc thì anh nói là the world hạnh phúc theo mình, tức là mọi người chung quanh sẽ hạnh phúc giống như mình đang có sự hạnh phúc chính mình. Thì Quang Thái xin được chấm dứt ở đây. Và nếu mà có dịp quý vị nào muốn hiểu thêm thì có thể về gặp quý thầy, gặp Chris bằng tiếng Mỹ, hoặc có thể gặp Quang Tuệ để chúng ta cùng chia sẻ với nhau Phật Pháp và chúng ta cùng học với nhau, để chúng ta có những giây phút hạnh phúc bây giờ và ở đây, chính mình và cho mọi người chung quanh cũng được hạnh phúc giống mình. Nam mô Bổn Sư Thích Ca Mâu Ni Phật.
Nam mô Bổn Sư Thích Ca Mâu Ni Phật. Kính thưa đại chúng, chương trình tu học của chúng ta cũng sắp được hoàn mãn. Để thư giãn tâm hồn sau khoảng gần 2 tiếng đồng hồ chúng ta đang ngồi đây, xin kính mời ca sĩ Nha Thanh sẽ lên cúng dường cho toàn thể đại chúng chúng ta. Vì là Phật xin đại chúng cho một tràng pháo tay.
Dạ. Nam mô Bổn Sư Thích Ca Mâu Ni Phật. Kính bạch chư tôn đức tăng ni, kính chào quý vị. Nhã Thanh xin thay đổi không khí một chút để tặng quý vị một bài hát. Thì Nhã Thanh xin hỏi ý kiến quý vị là Nhã Thanh nên hát bài Xuân hay là một bài về xứ Huế? Quý vị có ý kiến không, hay là tùy theo? Nhã Thanh muốn hát xứ Huế. Ok. Vậy thì Nhã Thanh xin mời quý vị cùng nghe bài hát Ai Ra Xứ Huế của nhạc sĩ Duy Khánh. Ai ra xứ Huế thì ra, ai về là về vì dạ, ai về là về sông Hương, nước sông Hương con thương chưa cạn, chim núi bay về. Người tình quê ơi người tình quê, thương nhớ lắm chi. Ai ra xứ Huế thì ra, ai về là về vì dạ, ai về là về Nam Giao. Dốc Nam Giao con cao mong đợi, trăng vĩ dạ còn gợi câu thề. Người tình quê ơi người tình quê, có nhớ xin trở về. Người tình quê ơi người tình quê, có nhớ xin trở về. A Di Đà Phật.
Nam mô A Di Đà Phật. Chúng ta không thể vì nghĩ đến tự riêng bản thân của chúng ta, mà còn những người vì không phương tiện đi đến đây được, và những người đã vì bệnh hoạn đang nằm ở bệnh viện hay ở nhà, và những người vì công ăn việc làm. Do đó chúng ta sẽ dành một phút hồi hướng đem công đức lành của chúng ta hôm nay để hồi hướng cho toàn thể những người đó. Con xin cung thỉnh chư tôn đức của toàn lễ chúng đứng lên chắp tay, dành một phút yên lặng để hồi hướng cho tất cả mọi người được bình an từng ngày, từng phút và từng giờ. Di Đà Phật. Di Đà Phật. Xin cung thỉnh đại chúng cùng quy y luôn. Từ quy Phật xin nguyện chúng sanh thể theo đạo ca, phát lòng vô thường. Từ quy Pháp xin nguyện chúng sanh thâm nhâm kinh tạng, trí tuệ như biển. Từ quy tăng xin nguyện chúng sanh thần lý đại chúng, thầy không ngày. Nguyện đem công đức lành hướng về khắp tất cả đệ tử và chúng sanh, đều trọn thành Phật đạo. Di Đà Phật. Xin đại chúng quay vào hai bên trong để cung tiễn chư tôn đức về phía tăng phòng. Và quý vị Phật tử nào có tiếng cúng hương linh thì mời quý vị vào nhà linh để tiếng cúng. Còn những quý vị nào không có, quý vị ở tại chỗ rồi chúng ta sẽ dùng bữa cơm ra với chùa. A Di Đà Phật.